My father really was a gift to the world. And before I say anything, we are so grateful that John and Jane were here in Israel to spend all this time with my father and to take care of him. We were in the States, Michael and I, and Ben, and it was comforting to us to know that during the hard times that John and Jane were here taking care of him every single day. The reason why my father was such a gift to the world is because people didn't know if he actually would ever exist. In fact, his parents didn't know. He was a bit of a surprise. When he was born, his mother was 48 years old. Is that right? 48 years old. That was a long time ago. So back then it wasn't so easy to have a baby when you're a 48-year-old woman. And she thought she had a little tumor in her tummy. She felt a little kind of strange growth, so she was going to her brother-in-law, Dr. Uncle Isaac, to have the tumor removed. And Isaac looked at her and said, "Sarah, that's no tumor, du bist schwanger, or you're pregnant." And she couldn't believe it, and that was how my father was known when he was a little boy. They called him Tumoral, right? You guys have probably heard this story, Little Tumor. So my father's life was an incredible gift to the world because as a kid he had a charmed life. Even though he grew up in a working class family, they loved classical music, and his brother, who was some 20 years older than he was, Moshe, whose daughters are here living in Israel, Sion and Devorah, he loved classical music, so Moshe had this Victrola record player, and they played Polvetzian dances by Borodin all the time, and my father used to love telling the story with a twinkle in his eye, that when he was 4 years old, he got so excited by the Borodin classical music that he would dance all around the room, and he put all these little records, this is back before CDs, they were little, LPs, he'd put them on the floor. 78s, not even LPs, thank you, Michael. And he would actually dance all around the room, and now occasionally my father was very wild when he danced, and it was like, cha-cha, he'd dance like that, and he would dance on, I know that's not Polvetzian dances, but anyway, he would dance on the records around the room, and occasionally he'd break some of them. And it ended up, when Moshe came back, he saw that all these expensive 78 records were broken, except for one, and Moshe cried, and then eventually the story goes that he decided to break the last one himself, and they had a laugh. And that was my father's life, is that he always didn't let the small stuff get to him. He didn't sweat the small stuff, and just had this real lust for life. And my father also, when he was later at high school, he won the Shakespeare Prize at Central High School in Philadelphia. And so my father was very fond of quoting Shakespeare, and as you guys know, that there's a famous speech in As You Like It called the 7 Ages speech about the 7 ages of man. And part of it at the end talks about the second childhood, at the very end of your life, your dotage, when suddenly you're like a kid again and you have to get wheeled around in a stroller or a wheelchair. And people have to take care of you. And I think we are grateful that our father really didn't have much of that. I mean, he had one day maybe in a wheelchair. And he didn't want to live life like that. He was so active that there was no second childhood for him. He wanted to live life to the fullest. He even stared at us and just said he didn't like the deterioration that he was going through, and he wasn't happy about it. So I'm grateful that he didn't have that humiliation that would have hurt him, at least. So the four roles I just wanted to talk about, one I've already talked about, which is that my father was a miracle child. Three other roles that he took on in his lifetime, because we all have different roles in life. One is that he was an explorer. So from Hashomer Hatzair in Maryland, to the Sierra Club, to the Boy Scouts, to a group that he founded called JOLT, Jewish Outdoor Leadership Training. He loved introducing kids to the great outdoors. And of course, he was so into exploring that he joined the astronaut program. So at NASA, he was on the Gemini program and hoping to actually make it into orbit. He was supposed to, believe it or not, be on the Mars mission. So that's something that he'd still be waiting for to this day, to hopefully go to Mars. But he had so much love for exploring that it led him to Israel. And most of all, he had love for this land. From Nahal Arugot to En Gedi to Wadi Kelt, he talks about exploring it with Ehud and seeing the beauties of the land, and that's part of what drove him to come back here, is the beauty of Israel. The next role that he took on was as a teacher and an author. He taught at UCLA in 1963. As many of you know, he taught physics. He also taught a lot of us about astronomy, about the planets. And he was a great introduction to Judaism for a lot of people. So many people started keeping Shabbat because of my father and saw how beautiful it was. The way that my father would explain the Torah with a twinkle in his eye, he was always giving these great Divrei Torah with great confidence, and you know that there was so much depth there, and he had these mind-blowing connections between science and Torah that eventually he put together in his book. And the final role I wanted to talk about, which John also mentioned, was as a family man. He was an excellent son to his parents. He was an excellent father to us, the best. You could not expect for a better father. He, even in his old age, he took such good care of his sonny boys, as he would call us, even in his 80s. And we should only be blessed that when we're at that age that we can take such good care of our own children, because he continually taught us and took us on vacations when he would go on business trips. He always called us out of the blue and just was very concerned about his children's life, and was very much a part of it. And the last thing I want to say is on this vacation that we just took to the Dead Sea, which shows my father's love for nature. His last days he didn't want to spend in a hospital. He wanted to be at Ein Bokek and seeing the Dead Sea and the beauty of Israel. And we're so grateful to John for coercing us to join him on this trip just last week. So this was just on Saturday. Then I asked Dad, I can't believe he's not with us because he's so much a part of our lives now, and always will be. But I said, what is the secret of life? What lesson would you like to pass on to at least my two daughters, your grandchildren? And he said, be brave and courageous in the face of adversity. And so that is something that it's very tough right now, because this is a challenging time for us, and we will try to be brave and courageous about it. What will make it easier is we'll remember the warmth of Dr. David B. Medved, the lusty sense of humor, his rollicking laugh, which just kept going on and on. It was infectious. And his care for the community, and all of his good works, which we'll try to emulate. We love you, Dad.